I want to start by saying I almost didn't post this. Not because I don't want to talk about it. I've been talking about it for 2 years. To detectives, to my mom, to a therapist who charges $180 an hour. I've talked about it plenty. I almost didn't post it because I still don't have a clean ending. There's no moment where I can tell you they caught him. There's no moment where everything made sense and I finally felt safe. It just stopped. And I've had to make peace with not knowing why. My name is Kayla. I was 17 when this started. I'm 19 now. When I still sleep with my phone face up on the nightstand so I can see it when it lights up. It started on a Tuesday in October. I remember that specifically because I had a history test that I knew I'd bombed, and I was in a bad mood walking home from school. I took my usual route down Birchwood, cut through the park on Clement, and then the last 2 blocks down my street. I'd walked that same route probably 500 times. It took about 18 minutes door to door. I got home, dropped my bag, poured a glass of water. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. The text said, "Yellow sweater today." I was wearing a yellow sweater. I stared at it for probably 30 seconds. My first thought, I'm not going to lie, was that it was funny. Like, genuinely, my first instinct was to laugh because it felt like exactly the kind of dumb prank one of my friends would pull after getting a new number or borrowing someone's phone. I screenshotted and sent it to my group chat. Everyone said it wasn't them. A couple people said that's creepy and sent skull emojis. I blocked the number and forgot about it within the hour. The second text came 4 days later, Saturday. I'd spent the morning helping my mom with errands. We went to the grocery store, the dry cleaner, then stopped for coffee at this little place on Marsh Street we went to sometimes. I was wearing a gray hoodie and jeans, hair in a ponytail. When we got home, I helped carry bags inside and then went up to my room to watch videos. My phone buzzed. Different unknown number? Text said ponytail? I felt it then. That drop in your stomach that doesn't have a name, but your body knows exactly what it means. It's the feeling of something shifting, of the world being slightly different from how it was a second ago. I sat on my bed and I read that word 4 or 5 times. Ponytail? 1 word, nothing else. I called my friend Danny. She talked me through it, said it was probably someone from school who got a burner app, that I should just block it and not respond, that whoever was doing it wanted a reaction. That made sense. It sounded right. I wanted it to be right, so I let myself believe it. I blocked the number. Over the next 2 weeks, I got 6 more texts, always from a different number, always 1 or 2 words, never a threat, never anything explicitly scary, just observations. Long way home. That one came on a Thursday when I'd taken a detour through the neighborhood because the weather was nice. Blue bike. I'd stopped to look at a bike someone had left chained to a fence. It was a weird thing to notice. I'd only looked at it for maybe 10 seconds. Laughing. I'd been on the phone with my cousin while walking to school and laughed at something she said. You dropped something. I had dropped something, a pen, outside the library. I hadn't noticed until I got home. And by that point, I'd gotten the text. And it didn't even matter about the pen anymore. Each one came within an hour of the thing it described. Sometimes less. I blocked every number. I told my mom after the 4th one. She drove the route with me, looked around, didn't see anything, said she'd call the school to ask if anyone had been reported for harassment. The school said no. She told me to document everything and try not to engage. I documented everything. I had a note in my phone with screenshots, dates, times, and what I was doing when the thing described happened. I'd started doing that automatically, the way you do when something is wrong and you don't know what else to do. The one that broke me was bus stop. I'd missed the bus that morning. Alarm didn't go off and had to stand at the stop near the Shell station for 20 minutes, waiting for the next one. I didn't usually take the bus. I only did it maybe once or twice a month when I slept in. There was no pattern to it. No one who knew my schedule would have predicted I'd be at that stop at 7:40 on a Wednesday. The text came at 8:12 while I was sitting in first period, bus stop. I went to the bathroom and sat in a stall and didn't come out for 10 minutes. That one scared me because of what it meant. It wasn't someone who knew my routine. It was someone who was following it, learning it, someone who just watched and waited and kept notes the same way I was keeping notes. I started varying my routes. I stopped walking alone. I had Danny meet me at the corner every morning, and either her or my mom picked me up after school. The texts kept coming anyway. Fewer of them because I was outside less alone, but they didn't stop. Red car my aunt had picked me up, and I was in her car at a gas station. Talking to her, I'd had a conversation with our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, while getting the mail. Whoever it was, they weren't deterred by me changing my habits. They just adjusted. I want to tell you what those weeks felt like from the inside, because I think people imagine that kind of thing is constantly terrifying. And sometimes it was. There were nights I couldn't sleep, mornings I made my mom walk me to the door, moments where I'd be in a perfectly normal situation and just freeze because I'd suddenly thought, someone is watching me right now. But a lot of it was something I didn't expect, which was exhaustion. Pure, heavy, relentless exhaustion. Fear takes a lot out of you when you have to maintain it for weeks. You can't sustain the spike, you just end up carrying this low, dull weight everywhere. I was tired at school, tired at dinner, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. And underneath the exhaustion was something else. Shame. Which I know doesn't make sense, but it was there. I felt stupid somehow, like I'd done something to invite this, like I should have been able to figure out who it was and make it stop. Like asking for help made me dramatic. My mom believed me. Danny believed me. But you internalize the skull emojis and it's probably just someone from school, and you start to feel like you're making it bigger than it is. I wasn't making it bigger than it was. We went to the police after the 8th text. I had every screenshot, every date, the note in my phone with what I'd been doing. The officer we talked to, I don't know. He listened. He took a report. He said without an explicit threat, there wasn't much they could do. But he'd flag the address, and if it escalated, they'd have a record. He said most of these things turn out to be someone the victim knows and doesn't suspect. He asked if I had any ex-boyfriends or anyone from school I'd had conflict with. I didn't. My mom pushed him a little. Asked if they could trace the numbers. He explained the burner apps and prepaid numbers are extremely difficult to trace without a court order, and getting a court order required demonstrating a credible threat of harm, which the text so far didn't meet the threshold for. So we just wait, my mom said. He said he was sorry. He said to call immediately if anything escalated. We drove home, and neither of us said anything. The text stopped in December, not gradually, just stopped. The last one was front steps, which came one afternoon when I'd been sitting on our porch, reading for about 20 minutes. After that, nothing. A week passed, then 2. Christmas came, then New Year's. I kept waiting for a new number, a new observation. It didn't come. By February, I'd started to breathe again a little. I still varied my routes. I still didn't like walking alone after dark. But the constant humming vigilance started to relax. I slept better. I stopped flinching every time my phone buzzed. I let myself believe it was over. 6 months later, the following June, I was watching the news with my mom. Local story. A man 2 streets over had been arrested on an unrelated charge. I won't say what it was. I won't say his name. The story was short, 30 seconds maybe, a photo of him and the address. I recognized the street. I knew that house. I'd walked past it hundreds of times. My mom called the detective who'd taken our report. She told him about the arrest, the address. He said he'd look into it. 2 weeks later, he called back and said that investigators had found something during a search of the man's property. A folder on a device, photos and notes related to several people in the neighborhood. My name was in there. Photos of me at the bus stop, at the park, walking home from school. The detective said the DA was reviewing whether they had enough to add charges related to what he'd done to me specifically. They didn't. Or if they did, I was never told. What I was told? He'd been watching the neighborhood for over a year before he was arrested for the other thing. The text had started 2 months after he moved in. He lived 400 feet from my front door. I think about the timing a lot. About the fact that it stopped in December and his arrest came in June. I don't know if he stopped because I changed my habits and I became less accessible. I don't know if something else drew his attention. I don't know if he would have eventually done something more than watch and text, or if the watching and texting was the whole thing for him. I'll never know, because no one has ever told me, and I have stopped expecting them to. What I do know is this. I was 17, walking a route I'd walked 500 times, and someone decided to make a project out of me. Not because I did anything, not because there was anything special about me, just because I was there, and he could, and nothing stopped him until something unrelated to me stopped him. That's the part I can't shake. The randomness of it. The idea that it could have been anyone on that street, and it happened to be me. I changed my habits. I looked over my shoulder. I kept notes. I went to the police. I did everything right, and none of it ended it. It ended because of something I had no control over, and I just happened to be okay when it did. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that the thing that felt like a stupid prank, one word, unknown number, something you'd send a skull emoji about and forget, it was real. And it went on for 2 months. And the guy who sent it lived 2 streets over. Trust the drop in your stomach. Keep the screenshots. Tell someone. And if you're walking home and something feels wrong, it's okay to take the long way. If you've experienced stalking or harassment, the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative and the Stalking Prevention Awareness and Resource Center both have resources and support hotlines. There's something quietly unsettling about Googling yourself. Most people do it at least once. Out of curiosity, out of boredom, maybe a little vanity, you want to see what the internet thinks of you. An old LinkedIn profile, a high school track result, maybe a comment you left on a forum 12 years ago that you'd rather forget. That's all Daniel Mercer expected when he typed his own name into the search bar on a Tuesday afternoon in November. He was 38 years old. He worked in logistics for a mid-sized manufacturing company in Columbus, Ohio. He had a wife named Carol, 2 daughters aged 9 and 6, and a mortgage he'd be paying off until he was 67. His life was, by every measure he could think of, ordinary, comfortable, his. The first result was his LinkedIn. The second was an old company newsletter. The third was his obituary. He almost scrolled past it. The word obituary registered a half second late. The way your brain sometimes refuses to process something it doesn't expect. He stopped, scrolled back up, clicked the link. It loaded slowly. The website was old, some local paper out of a town called Harlan, Kentucky. Population maybe 10,000. Daniel had never been to Kentucky in his life. He didn't know anyone there. He had no reason to. The page loaded. Daniel Ray Mercer, 38, of Harlan, Kentucky, passed away peacefully on March 3rd, 2019, after a brief illness. He was a devoted husband and loving father. Daniel worked for 14 years as a floor supervisor at Whitmore Manufacturing. He is survived by his wife, Patricia, and their children, Thomas, age 11, and Grace, age 8. A private service will be held at the family's request. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made. He stopped reading. He read it again from the beginning. His name. His age, exactly right, to the year. His job, logistics, manufacturing, close enough to make his stomach drop. 14 years of employment. He'd been at his company for 13. The physical description in the second paragraph: 6 feet, brown hair going gray at the temples, a scar on his left forearm from a childhood bike accident. The scar. He looked down at his left forearm, ran his thumb across it. The wife's name was wrong. Patricia, not Carol. The children's names were wrong. The town was wrong, but everything else, everything that described him, specifically, the details a stranger wouldn't guess, were exactly right. He sat with that for a long moment. Then he did what any reasonable person would do. He told himself it was a coincidence. He closed the laptop and went to make dinner. He didn't sleep that night. By the next morning, he was back at the laptop. He found a phone number for the Harlan County Courier, the paper that had published the obituary buried on a contact page that hadn't been updated since 2016. He called it. It rang 9 times before someone picked up. An older woman, unhurried, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who's worked in a small office for 30 years and has no plans to change that. He explained who he was, explained what he'd found, tried to keep his voice even. The woman, she gave her name as Dolores, asked him to hold. He held for 4 minutes, he counted. When she came back, she told him the obituary had been submitted by the family. That was standard practice. The paper didn't write them. They published what was provided. She told him there was a contact name on file, a woman who had called in to submit it. He asked for the name. Dolores paused. She said she probably shouldn't give out personal information. He said he understood. And could she at least tell him if there was a phone number on file? Another pause. Then, there is, but honey, it's the strangest thing. I almost didn't tell you this, but the number they gave us, it's a Columbus area code. He asked her to read it to him. She did. He recognized it immediately. He'd known that number his entire life. He'd dialed it thousands of times. It was his mother's landline. He didn't call his mother right away. He's not sure why. Later he would think it was because some part of him already understood that whatever was on the other side of that phone call would change things. And he wanted a few more hours in the version of his life where nothing had changed yet. Instead, he drove to his mother's house. She lived 20 minutes away, a small ranch house in a suburb of Columbus where Daniel and his younger sister Kara had grown up. His father had died when Daniel was 16. His mother had lived alone since. She was 71, still sharp, still gardening in the summers. He had dinner with her every other Sunday. He knew her. He thought he knew her completely. She was in the kitchen when he came in. She looked up and smiled, and saw his face, and stopped smiling. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table he'd eaten breakfast at for the first 17 years of his life, and he pulled up the obituary on his phone and slid it across to her. He watched her face. She didn't look confused. She didn't lean in to read it more carefully. She looked at it for about 3 seconds, just long enough to confirm what it was, and then she set the phone down and folded her hands on the table and looked out the window. That was how Daniel Mercer knew that his mother had seen it before. The silence lasted almost a full minute. Then she said, "I wondered if you'd ever find it." He didn't say anything. He prepared things to say on the drive over, questions, demands, a whole architecture of confrontation. It all left him at once. She got up and poured herself a glass of water, stood at the sink with her back to him. When she turned around, her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "Before you," she said, "there was another boy." His parents had been young when they married. His father was 22. His mother was 19. They moved to Kentucky. His father had work there, a cousin with a factory connection. They lived in Harlan for almost 4 years. And in those 4 years, before Daniel was born, before his sister Kara was born, his mother had a son. She named him Daniel. She named him Daniel Ray Mercer. He was born in 1967. He was healthy. He was hers for 6 weeks, before the doctors found something wrong with his heart, a defect. The kind that today would be managed with surgery, but in 1967 was a quiet death sentence. He died before he was 4 months old. They buried him in Harlan. His mother never spoke of him. Not to Daniel's father's family, not to her own, not to Daniel or Kara. The grief had gone so deep, so fast, that covering it over felt like the only way to survive it. They moved back to Ohio the following year. She got pregnant with Daniel, and when he was born, she gave him the same name. And she told herself that was not a strange thing to do, that it was an honoring, a continuation, that the name deserved to be carried by a living child. And she buried the other story so completely that she almost stopped believing it herself. Almost. "When you turned 38, she said, I started thinking about him. He never got to be 38. And I thought I just wanted it written down somewhere. That he existed, that he had a name, that someone knew." She had called the Harlan County Courier. She had submitted the obituary herself. She'd used his details, Daniel's details, her living son, because she didn't know what else to put. She didn't have a photo. She barely had memories. She used the only Daniel Mercer she fully knew. "I gave them my number," she said, "in case they needed to verify anything. I didn't think anyone would ever search for it." Daniel sat at that table for a long time. He thought about the name he'd carried his whole life and what it meant that it had been carried before him, briefly, by a boy who never made it to spring. He thought about his daughters, 9 and 6, and what it would mean to lose one of them, and what a person would have to do with that kind of grief if they had nowhere to put it. He thought about the obituary, the details his mother had filled in from his life, mapped onto his brother's, the scar she had written in, the one on his left forearm, because the first Daniel had a birthmark in the same place, a small red mark she had kissed every night for 6 weeks. She hadn't even realized she'd done it. She told him that with a kind of bewilderment, like her hand had moved without her permission. She cried then. For the first time in the conversation, properly cried. He got up and stood next to her at the sink and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. He still thinks about it sometimes. about how the version of himself that exists in that Kentucky newspaper died on March 3rd, 2019, about the wife named Patricia and the children named Thomas and Grace, a whole life assembled from scraps of his, given to a ghost so the ghost could have something to leave behind, about his mother at 71, alone in her kitchen, submitting an obituary for a baby she buried in 1967, filling in the blanks with the only life she could imagine him having, about how grief doesn't expire. It just finds new shapes, new hiding places, how it can live inside a person for 50 years and still be breathing. He never told his sister. His mother asked him not to, and he understood why. Some things were only ever meant to be known by the people who were already carrying them. He did one other thing, though. He drove to Harlan the following spring, a 6-hour drive, no particular plan. Found the cemetery with some help from the county records office. Found the grave. The headstone was small and worn. The dates barely legible. Daniel Ray Mercer, 1967, just the 1 year. Born and gone in the same calendar page. He stood there for a while. He didn't know what to feel, or rather, he felt too many things in too many directions to name any one of them. Before he left, he did the only thing that seemed right. He introduced himself. Some people live whole lifetimes without knowing their name was someone else's first. This story is dedicated to the children who didn't get to stay, and to the parents who carried them anyway.